Welcome, system thinkers. You're watching The Question. I'm your host, Ben Callahan, and each week I invite a new co-host to join us and help facilitate a deep dive into design systems. This episode of The Question is sponsored by Zeroheight and Sparkbox, and we're so glad you're here. Hello, everyone. Thanks for taking some time out of your day to join me for this episode's deep dive. My name is Ben Callahan. I'm a design system researcher, writer, speaker, coach, and consultant. But most of all, I'm a curious guy. And that's precisely what led me to create The Question. Every week, a new co-host and I will ask you a few questions about a very specific design system-related topic. You'll have 48 hours to answer, and everyone who does is invited to join the deep dive. Each week is kind of like a mini research project on a very niche design system topic. This only works if we all stay in learning mode. Before I introduce my co-host for this week, I just want to say a big thank you to Zeroheight and Sparkbox for sponsoring this episode. Zeroheight is the end-to-end design system management platform, the place your team can document, deliver, measure, and evolve your design system. Book a demo or learn more at zeroheight.com. Sparkbox partners with complex organizations to create user-driven digital experiences, including world-class design systems. Learn more at sparkbox.com/thequestion. This week, I'm joined by my co-host Molly Covert to talk about design system communication strategies. Molly is a dear friend of mine and has worked on design systems at some large organizations like Capital One and CarMax. She's brilliant, she's funny, and she's here to broaden your perspective. Let's do it. So this week, Molly and I put our heads together to try and figure out what question to ask. And she was really excited to dive into communication strategies. And so we gave some context here. And really, I came up with this definition. So we can debate that, whether that's a good one or not too. But a program intended to spread information throughout an organization about the past, present, and future of that organization's design system. And I think I even edited it at some point, maybe on the actual survey, to include not just spreading, but also, gathering information from others. So it made it more two-way than one-way. So with that context, we had kind of two questions. One was, what groups are a regular part of your current design system communication strategy? And so that was our quantitative question, and we'll take a look at the data here in just a moment.
Second question is, what are the core elements of your current design system communication strategy, and how would you change it if you had no constraints?
Yeah, so that one gets fun, and we're going to have a lot of fun talking about some of the crazy ideas y'all had. But Molly, tell me, first of all, what you saw in this quantitative data.
I actually, when I saw this, I sent Ben a message because I said, wow, this looks exactly like I thought it would. There was literally no surprises here, but a couple things really jumped out to me. The first being that, well, one, again, it looked exactly like I thought it was. And I was surprised to see a few things. One, design, of course, is going to be the biggest, but I was surprised that it wasn't in exact parity with development, because these two departments, if anything, should be receiving the same communication strategy. And just like information. But the brand bar was actually a lot bigger than I thought it was. I feel like there's a lot of disparity between brand and design systems. Traditionally, it shouldn't be that way, but I have found in my experience that it has been. So I was excited that it was as big as it was, but expected it to be much smaller. The other part of that brand portion being that agency partners would usually be included in that brand, and agency partners was quite small. The other enormous part of this is that leadership was so small. Leadership, in my mind, should be at least in a similar parity to design, development, user experience, and receiving maybe not the same communication in terms of receiving, but like at least the same information one way or the other.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to see how you guys felt in terms of what that brand relationship as well as that leadership relationship.
I'll volunteer something. Hello.
All right.
Hi, my name's Jeff. I've been working on design systems for the last 4 years or so at a fintech company called Bill, and I will absolutely say that the communication with leadership is essential. We were in a scenario for quite a while where engineering leadership was making decisions for the team, and we were just kind of reacting, and it was pretty toxic. Like mandates from a single silo. I've worked with the knapsack folks, and Chris Strahl, the CEO over there, is like mandates from an individual silo are some of the most challenging things that you find with design systems teams. And I was like, man, I'm living it. Anything you can do to try to identify who are the decision makers and have them be as involved as possible from day one, because you never really want to be in a situation as an individual contributor where you're just kind of like knee-jerk reacting to decisions that happened somewhere and you have no idea.
Yeah, there's an interesting, and I think this is really dependent on the company culture, that if a leadership views their role as more as proactive or reactive, do they want solutions brought to them, or do they want to provide the solution and just have you execute? I think that might largely depend on the culture, but there might be a disagreement between the team and the leadership if that's the right move.
Yeah, jump in, Amy.
Plus wanting that. What I found is leadership needs a kind of a subset or a summary of the information. They don't need to know like the super details, but if you do not make yourself visible and your team very visible about your contributions all the time, the design system can be kind of tucked away under a design bucket or an engineering bucket, and people just assume it's there. They assume it's like electricity and water and it just keeps going, but it really doesn't. You need to lean in and say, this is important. This is distinct from the others. Here's what we're delivering. And if you don't do that, you put yourself at risk.
You're so right. I think I like to say, as like a design system manager, my job is to be a full-time influencer and not in like the TikTok variety, but I'm constantly influencing, communicating, and lobbying for usually like attention, like I'm a needy child, but it really is like just that. I need to raise the awareness because my work isn't the big flashy, exciting work that's, creating the millions of dollars, but I'm definitely providing the fuel to get us there.
Yeah, I remember a previous conversation in one of the last three question deep dives that we did where we got into this idea of talking a little bit about marketing as a role on a systems team. And the lines got blurry for me as I was reading through some of the data here on the more qualitative question, getting into like lots of different actual approaches people are using. But definitely this blends into sort of how do we sell or market the system internally too, right? So the sales pitch versus the sort of more one-way communication strategy, This is awesome. Thank you for the feedback on that, folks. Let's take a look at, so as we were going through that second question, so again, like what are the core elements of your current communication strategy? And then in addition to that, how would you change that if you had no constraints? We kind of picked up on two sort of like very, very high level responses, right? One was kind of, really identified with this top statement, right? It's not really based on anything. It's very sporadic. We do our best to remind ourselves to communicate with people when we do things, So there's that sort of sentiment where it's like, we have so much going on as systems people, and we are spread thin already. And we know we have to do this, but it's reactionary. It's not super proactive. And then there was folks who have long lists of things that they do on a fairly regular cadence, all hands meetings, lunch and learns, monthly and quarterly email updates, Slack channels, all of these things. So there was a pretty distinct type of answer. One was usually much more on the minimum, one was much more on the robust. So we tried to kind of pull interesting statements from those. And the summary of that data is kind of in these two pink stickies at the bottom, where we just pulled out specific things that people identified in either of those two categories. So we can spend some time looking into that. But I especially wanted to call out the two in yellow here, like this statement: leadership doesn't currently value communication the same way it values components, which I thought was just hard to read, but also this is a real thing. Do any of you feel you're struggling with this specific sentiment now in your approach, in your system?
How are they going to know about what components are the right components without communication?
I have talked with a lot of folks who are feeling that struggle. It's like leadership, they have a lot of opinions on what we're actually doing, right? They want to know, they want to have a voice. And maybe this comes back to your culture comment earlier, Molly, about what kind of leader you're dealing with. But a lot of times they want to have a little bit more influence, and they actually don't care so much about what you're saying. So that's a challenge. The second one here was this idea, and I don't know, Jeff, maybe this was you that made this one. Yeah,
100%.
Okay. Well, share a little bit about what that was, that scenario.
Sure. So this was a really interesting one. So I was a design technologist, so part of the UX or product team, but kind of bridging that gap between design and engineering. And this thing called the newsletter just popped up. And my manager at the time, and then he pulled in one of the designers, started working on the design for it. And then, I helped out with some of the content for metrics for the initial version. We published it, and it was only, I don't even know, a month or 2 months later that I found out that this was something that came to our team from engineering leadership. It was like, okay, so this was something that just was thrown on us, and not even everybody on the team was aware of where it even came from, never mind having the discussion around who's going to maintain this, who's going to be responsible for the content. Because just like anything with design systems, after you set it up, it's not just something that you set up and you let free into the wild. There has to be somebody there to care for it and maintain it, and ensure that it's going to continue to have the same quality as whatever the initial work was, right? And so, that's a bit of detail in there, but it was a real challenge. Like, well, we're doing this thing, and we haven't even had the discussion of where it comes from. Never mind all the details. Right?
Jump into it. But that's all right. I actually wanted to talk about the first, the leadership doesn't value communication bit, and I was just thinking about this lately. I wonder if it's more of the system team trying to find the language that leadership uses to communicate with each other, and kind of try to add where design system helps propel that to sort of speaking to leadership in a language they understand. Yeah. I found that that sometimes gets the ears up once you're able to share how design systems benefit with the metrics or the goals that the team has at a company level. And I often find, at least this is what we were kind of trying to work through at our org, we existed in two different places. For example, it wasn't necessarily a bottom-up and top-down sort of OKR view, which we're trying to blend at the moment. But unless a design system team is completely clear about what OKRs matter, even at a company level, I find that communication would sound very different for both groups.
Give us an example, can you? Or someone else jumping in there. Yeah, go for it.
Well, we're working out, for example, some of the OKRs that we're setting for the design system. So far, they were isolated, independent. When we're speaking, even when I've been presenting to leadership, they've sounded mostly technical. When we're talking about improving certain components or why we want to spend more time in documentation. However, now, when we're doing our OKR planning, a lot of the leadership has been keen, because we're starting with the company level OKRs, and we're able to and kind of match that with the bottom up. So it's kind of meeting in the middle. I'm not sure if I'm able to explain it too well. I don't have an example off the top of my head, but I can see that blend happening where our objectives are meeting with the company level objectives much more clearly, and that has automatically, curiously brought in a lot of the leadership at the highest level as well to kind of lean in and help contribute to how they can help us push that forward. So whether it's in terms of offering more capacity, at least those conversations are being opened up, and it's fairly new for us. But I found that shift in language has been helpful.
Noelle or Brian, if you're continuing that thought, jump in.
Sure. So I would say, like, I was thinking about the organization that I'm at currently. It's Nationwide Insurance, and it's like a very corporate style communication, but it actually works really, really well. I think corporate sometimes has a negative connotation, but in this case, it's led to a really high adoption rate of the system. And the way that works is our team is like, yeah, we manage the components, we manage the design system, but we also are brought into leadership conversations as almost internal consultants about lots and lots of projects. So I think in that way, it's kind of like, if you can establish that expertise and trust with leadership, they actually sometimes will end up coming to you to say, hey, we know that you care about accessibility and quality, and we know that you care about efficiency. So let's look at all these projects together and come up with a strategy kind of at that level together before implementation.
Ryan, what's up?
Yeah, I think just carrying on that thought, at Morningstar, we really thought about our system as either a service or a product. So our OKRs and our process was all predicated on understanding what our customer, engineers, designers, and our leadership team wanted from the system, and then writing our OKRs in a way that met them. When the other speaker was talking about like top down and bottom up, we did try to do that, but it was always through the lens of who are our primary customers, who are our secondary customers. And I think that really helped get the buy-in and framed all our communication around what we were and what value we were delivering to the business.
Yeah, I love that. Christy?
I was just thinking, because this last company that I was at, I was working with them to set company-wide OKRs. And I've noticed that leadership has the tendency to set really large initiatives, but not really break them down for their teams.
Yeah.
So it was part of what I was doing with them was showing them how they could break down large initiatives to each individual contributor on their team so that they knew that they were providing value for the entire company. So I think whether you're an individual contributor or a manager, you can ask your manager, hey, can you break down this larger initiative and show me how I can contribute to it as an individual contributor? And your manager should be able to do that for you. And if you're a manager, you should be doing this for your team members. I actually had my team do this practice themselves as a product team, just showing them how they can break down larger initiatives. So I actually had them write down their own goals that related to larger initiatives so that they could really understand how they were contributing to the larger roadmap.
Yeah, I love that. Molly, what's up?
I've heard so many great things, and I want to revisit a few of the awesome things that I've heard. And one was the corporate attitude of the high adoption rate linked to a corporate environment. And I think that is so spot on, because when you have that accountability structure tied to key results, you often have really higher adoption rates, because that leadership team is holding your product teams accountable for adoption rates. So it really changes the messaging around the system. Are you having to constantly prove your why if leadership is really helping you do that? So what are you communicating to your teams? It's really depending on how strongly your leadership team is advocating for your system, and how that is also tied to a product team's OKR structure versus your design team's OKR structure. And what I found is that really comes down to, if I'm a design system manager and we have a quarterly OKR schedule, that's coming down to storytelling. I'm not going to a town hall or a showcase and rattling off my OKRs. I'm telling this really impactful story about the how and the why this is going to help enable your teams. So I think there's a really important through line there from goals, accountability into storytelling that we need to talk about.
Yeah, I love that storytelling piece. So Daniel, I want to get you to jump into what's up.
The corporate point's interesting, because I actually see it the other way around. In many corporate environments, you've been through several design systems, several teams all over the place have tried it, and they failed, which is why you're doing a new one or starting the next generation. And so there is a lot of history. One of the things I found is with that process, trust for the design system, each new design system, there's less trust, there's less hope from the consumers. And so I kind of see communication as there's two main branches of communication. There's leadership communication, and then there's like consumer communication. And the leadership communication can be great, but if your consumers, your engineers don't trust the system because last time they couldn't use it in Angular, so they just don't want to even try using it again, That is like you just put right there. Adoption is just flat out. You can't do it because engineers don't trust that you're going to be able to do it. And if we think about the KPIs again, they're always pretty tight. They want things now. Let's get it done in the next quarter. We've all seen that curve where to adopt a design system, your efficiency goes down to start with. As you learn the design system and learn the guidance, learn how to use it, how it fits into your ecosystem, and then it goes up, right? But those KPIs are actually working against that because we don't have that built-in time to provide that learning opportunity to learn the new system. And so again, they actively discourage adoption because of those type short-term deadlines.
We could have a whole session just on what she said.
We really could.
That is what is the communication strategy based on the maturity model for your system reflected by your adoption rates. Like that is just expectation setting with leadership is such a powerful message and that's why I love communication because it's so deep.
Hey everybody, there's still a lot of great content left in this episode, but let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors.
How much time are you spending wrangling all the aspects of your design system? Trying to create a unified experience with your UI libraries, your code resources, your design tokens? You need a platform that makes managing a design system easier, not a chore. So zeroheight is the design system management platform that centralizes everything, including your documentation. And this year, we've rolled out some game-changing features that make zeroheight even more powerful. First up, we have the adoption tab, which gives you real-time insights into how your design system is actually being used. So you can hook it up directly to your code repos and NPM packages, and it will not only make sure that everyone is using your latest packages, but it'll also give you insights into component usage as well. Finally, you can prove real design system ROI. And then there's our brand new API as well. In a few minutes, you can create your own Figma plugin or API chatbot to bring your documentation to the places that your team is actually searching for it. If you're looking to make design system management seamless and efficient, what are you waiting for? Try zeroheight for free today by heading to zeroheight.com and use the offer code QUESTION to get a free 90-day trial. That's zeroheight.com and the offer code is QUESTION. Enjoy the show.
For the last 16 years, Ben and I have both been business partners and friends in our company Sparkbox, which is always aimed to build a better web. In the beginning, that was two software engineers coming together believing there was a better way to do things. What Sparkbox evolved into is a complete team that includes user experience, design, engineering, and plenty of consulting and strategy. About 10 years ago, we dove headfirst into design systems, helping some of the world's largest companies and universities and even tons of small businesses to help realize the efficiency and promise of what design systems can bring. I continue to be in awe of what Ben learns and shares in this community. If you need strategic or tactical help with your design system, swing by sparkbox.com and reach out. We'd love to partner with you and your team. Have a great day. Enjoy the show.
And this is getting into, Molly, some of the stuff we were talking about before, just looking at okay, there's such different answers and some of these teams have such different contexts they're trying to operate in, right? So how do we, I don't know if we nailed it here, but we were trying to think how could we think about a spectrum of design system team size or a spectrum of the amount of effort or the amount of value that a specific type of communication is intended to sort of cover. And think through a way to kind of graph out or chart out the kinds of opportunities we have to communicate. And maybe that would help us. And that's something we can kind of take and try to work on. But it would be nice to be able to say, I have this context. What should I focus on? Where should I put my energy? Jeff, what's up?
Yeah, something Christy mentioned just reminded me of something that Dan Mall said a couple of weeks ago. He hosted a planning design systems for 2024 session. And one of the things that he discussed was goal setting and goal setting for your design systems team, but tying it up to the corporate goals. But the thing that really stood out to me was, and this I think obviously depends on the maturity of communication at your organization, if this would work or not, but he recommended taking the results of that, the inclusive goals that the design system team has worked toward, and showing how they relate up to the company goals and giving it a very prominent location on your documentation site. He was like, front and center, maybe even before foundations. And, obviously this depends on if the culture is one that reads docs, for example. But really, like, making that work that your team did as visible as possible, so that when you're inundated with all these requests, you can always point people back to, okay, if we're going to accommodate that, it's going to take us away from what we've agreed that we're working towards.
This is a hot tip. This is something that I lobbied for a really long time, and it stands right up there, like under getting started in our documentation site, because I could not tell the story of why, after doing this for a year and a half, I'm like, I'm going to burn out. I can't keep selling myself after doing this. Like, it's so hard. And honestly, like, it becomes exhaustive. So it's just boom, executive summary. Here's everything top level leadership needs to know. That's not going to change. You can link it to your roadmap and then put a pin in it and just like, I don't want to say like per my last email then, but like, if they're like, tell us again why we need this, there you go.
So we hinted at the idea of storytelling quickly, but I would love to hear a little bit more about that, because I think, like, at least in a lot of my work in coaching, this is an area where I spend a lot of time with folks, is just helping them understand the org chart and then understand the stories that every person needs to hear, right? Like, so tell me, is this something you're doing in your systems? Is that working? Is it not? Give me some stories here. Like, what stories are working, what aren't?
I believe that storytelling is an essential fourth part of the product trio. I don't think that product can exist without it. And it's the only way to really get buy-in with your stakeholders. So I think with my design team, I really, really pushed them to practice storytelling and to practice meaningful and concise storytelling. And I would have them really post in a communication channel daily, what they were doing, how they were impacting the business, how it was relating to other teams. And this really helped them communicate and to be less nervous to kind of speak up when leadership team was on the call. Just having my team kind of practice speaking during a call and telling what they're working on and ask meaningful questions. I do think it's pretty essential.
I'm so glad you just like led with stakeholder buy-in. That is where the highest level, really emotional story needs to be told, because they don't understand the ins and outs of components and code. They're like, tell me why this matters. Give me a reaction to it. They might want some numbers to surface, but they're not going to understand a Figma library if I show it to them. They're going to look at adoption numbers and be like, I don't understand is this good? They're going to want to know like the emotion behind it. That's where the storytelling, I think, is really, really important.
Well, and it's also, and I was trying to figure out how to say this, but it's also relating different parts of the business to what you're doing. I find that leaders really silo pieces out and they don't understand how everything in the business is interconnected. So storytelling really helps with that interconnectedness and how we relate to each other within the business, and how, this little small component can even relate to what's happening in retail, right? Like it relates all across.
100%. And here's another thing. I think the brand conversation, again, brand in that chart was represented so much more than I thought it was going to be. And I was really glad to see that. But customers only experience a very small part through advertising and marketing. Primarily how they're going to experience it is through our digital products. And that's where the design system needs to live and breathe the brand. If we're not collaborating and having those meaningful discussions and collaborating and storytelling across our brand to our digital products, ultimately you're going to have a very disconnected experience.
Daniel?
I was going to talk about storytelling from a consumer standpoint, and then back to that kind of trust of the consumers. I find storytelling is really powerful in there. People want to know why you did certain things. Because they probably have done it a different way. Why should they adopt your design system that does it the other way to how they designed it or they implemented it? I can't tell you the number of times I've heard from the organization, I can't adopt this, it's not accessible. I'm like, no, I've been working on this for years. my job is to make this stuff accessible. I can assure you it's accessible. And providing that, that half an hour talk or that article to say, here's the kind of problem we have, here's how it affects someone with a disability, here's our research, here's the options we had, here's why we picked it. It's not perfect because it's totally impossible to make the perfect component. Here's the things where accepting is not great, but we think that's the best thing, and we're going to stick with this until we do some more research and find out maybe we can improve it here. And that really helps with the trust and transparency, and people think, oh, this team knows what they're doing. I can trust that their component's going to do it. And that story really fills them with confidence.
I love that you called that out. And that's such a different story, I think, that we think about when we are talking to leadership and telling those big, brand stories. It's ultimately a design system was brought in because there's issues. Like we're solving consistency issues or service issues or, engineering issues, and ultimately telling people that what they're probably using isn't going to work long term. And so there's like an ego thing that's happening here. So how do we tell that story in a meaningful way to where we're compelling them to use what we're giving them while not telling them that their baby is ugly and that they need to stop using it? It's a very carefully crafted story.
It really is. And it gets at one of the things that's really frustrated me a little bit about some of the approaches folks are taking around interface audits, even just like going out and identifying all the areas where we've messed up and then going to leadership and saying, hey, look how bad we are. Give us money to not be bad anymore. I'd much rather approach that by saying, hey, here's a few areas where we've done really good stuff. We think we can spread that around the org in a much more effective way with the system, right? Like that's just like flipping the script on the story, And I think it's such a more positive way of telling that specific story. I want to get to Ron too. And Amy, Ron, jump in, man.
Juggling baby. So
right.
If you hear any gurgling sounds or anything like that, it's not me. And I'll try and be brief. But so this is kind of a story about storytelling from the sort of somewhat recent past, about a year or so ago, when I was still fairly new to the team. And it's maybe framing it a little different than some of the other perspectives. It's more about storytelling about what you're going to do and the sales pitch. And this came, sorry, my other daughter just got home and screaming. So basically the context was there was a business reorg and our business unit was competing with another one that we were going to merge within, which had a separate design system. So we needed to both position ourselves to be the successor system and absorb them rather than get absorbed by them or be made to do a sort of collective do-over. And there was also a design director too many for the future organization. So our design director needed to almost burnish his credentials and vie for his position in the successor role in the successor organization. So what we actually did supporting him in that was to not focus on what we'd done already, which was admittedly not that great or not that much by that stage, but it was more of a sketch of what things could be like in the future, and almost like the future retrospective of, in a year's time, we'll have done this, and wouldn't it be, here's what we think our digital experiences should look like. And the net result, skipping through all the interim bit, was our director got the position. We absorbed the team members from the other system, incorporated their components into our system where relevant, and just left it to wither on the vine where not, and engaged with the brand team, their agency, to actually define what the digital expression of the overall brand should be, because that was hitherto not at all worked out well. And we're still in the process of working through all of that into the system and such, but it's given us a lot of credibility, both with our design director and the wider organization, because we've been involved with the brand in sketching this nice vision that everybody would like to get to. We're still not there, but they're at least excited about something, when as in the past, they were just only looking at what we've currently got and why it's not working. So even if it's not something that can be realized right now, it's really useful to have a vision of what you want to do, both in the components and the system outreach and support, and having a community and network to source inward contributions and that kind of thing.
Love that, Ron. Yeah. That's phenomenal. I love that. The vision actually is what's going to create excitement, right? And that we're looking for that personal connection with folks, right? We want them to kind of come on board with this idea. They want to be a part, get them to be part of something bigger than themselves. Amy, what's up?
Yeah, 100% to like, what is the ultimate vision? You know, like what inspires people to go towards, you know, this end goal that we all agree is great. What I was going to say is, I also like to go kind of into the past, into the history of like, why did the organization feel like they had the need for the design system in the first place? Because there are certain things that were true at that time. Like maybe people noticed we were absorbing a lot of companies. We needed to kind of unify the brand, or maybe there were issues that were detected at sort of like a fundamental level, and they thought, "Hey, design system is that solution." And I always try to remind myself that like we in this room, we know what design system is. You know, we know, you know, like all the little components and how they build up and the patterns. We know the design and engineering workflow, but not everybody else does. And,
So true.
you know, it's kind of, I always like to poke people and go like, okay, so you know that you need a design system, but what do you think a design system is? Because then you kind of figure out like, well, what misconceptions do they have? Or what things do they really think are like, oh yeah, I've seen this work at this other company, and go, oh, okay, well, if you want to be like that because you want to get to this end future goal, well, here's the things that we need to do. And it kind of helps you like get the list, and I go like, oh wow, Roy, I didn't know that. I didn't know the design system was more than components. I didn't know that it was about this education journey and like normalizing the language, and like people, you kind of get people on your side, and you also figure out like who's going to be like sort of like your champions for like, oh, this is why we're still driving towards the future.
Yeah. Love that, Amy. It's so true. And Molly, you and I know too, when we ask those questions, what is a system that we're going to get so many different answers from people all over the org? Yeah.
Especially like, again, like I had said for a year and a half, I had to go into every single meeting and be sure I told everybody what a system was so that they didn't form their own incorrect conclusion as to what our goal was and what we should be doing. Yeah. You got to own your system as much as you can and try to control that narrative.
Noelle?
Yeah, this was something that my team did before I was here, and I'm sure other companies are doing it too, but I thought it was just such a neat idea. And that was creating like a hype reel video for the design system to show before meetings, or just to share org-wide. So it gets projects teams excited about it, and you really just like pitch it like a product, like it's like a product reel to say like, this is how it works. See how beautifully everything comes together. All these things, and you know, you're zhuzhing it up with some really cool animations and things, and people get really excited about that, even if it's like 1 minute long. If you just lead with that, like, I don't know, that was just really successful at our organization. It was cool.
Nice.
That's such a dream.
Yeah.
I love it so much. Like, it could be really sexy and just say all of the things that I don't want to say in an email.
Yes, that's great. We're gonna be hiring whole communication teams on our systems teams before long, if we haven't already. Daniel, what's going on?
Those hype reels are awesome, but they also scare me. And it's kind of come back to a question we had last week about things we're missing, and is that single leadership, that single voice. There's been several times now where the brand has come in with their new look and feel for the sites and sent out their hype reel. And it's like, oh wow, let's use the new version. Let's make the new. Let's look at and make it look like the new brand style. But the design system's not ready for that yet. And so by having this hype reel about the new brand look, people are now discouraging the use of the design system inadvertently, because it doesn't look like this new cool thing. And so kind of having that brand and design system single communication strategy is something that we don't currently have as well as we should do, and it's really important because it causes a lot of confusion.
I think, Christy, I'm going to call you out here. If I remembered, so if this is not you, you tell me. But I think you gave this comment because you were talking about documenting feedback loops. Is this you? Was this you?
Yes, that was me.
Will you just? I just thought this part that I bolded especially was like really poignant. Will you just sort of restate that for folks? I think it's a really important point.
Yeah. So I think something I learned kind of hard lesson wise in my last role was steady documentation. I was constantly taking notes and documenting my meetings and even my workshops, making sure that everything was documented at live while we were working on it, and then referring people back to it. So sometimes I would add these notes to the project document or, add it to a post or something, but making sure that everything was documented in detail because people just don't remember. And I can say, coming from that high level role, especially if you're talking to leadership, they've got back-to-back meetings all the time. And sometimes you need to send them back and be like, hey, remember this conversation? And they're like, oh, no, but so documenting in detail and having it in a place where everyone in the company can access it is essential to success.
Yeah, some accountability goes a long way with that stuff, right? So nice. Thanks for sharing that. If we shift, we're moving through time quickly. So just to shift over to the hopes and dreams section, I just thought it was really fun to hear some of you kind of imagine a little bit about what you would do if you didn't have any constraints. And there were some really fun ideas. I tried to highlight and bold some of these, but this sentiment was really interesting too. That might have been you as well, Christy, but something around this idea of like, hey, sometimes I feel like there's not a lot of safety in the communications, and people don't necessarily know that if they give you feedback, you're going to actually hear it and honor it and try to do something about it. So removing a barrier, I think I love that. And that's one it's so hard, like, no constraints is what I told you. But like to do that is just like, that's such a time that just takes time. It takes building trust over time. Right. And showing people that you're going to honor what you've said. So that's a really, I love the authenticity behind that statement. We talked about this earlier, but the past and the history of the history of the design system, I think that's so critical. I think this was you, Daniel, like Apple's WWDC event. You want to have some serious promotion behind this thing. Was that the intent, like the impact of it, or was it more the sort of educational, hands-on nature of it?
I think it's both. I mean, it's how well organized it is. It is just, the focus is on it. For anyone who's an Apple developer, the focus is on it. The same should be for the design system. If you're design system, engineer for your organization, your focus should be on what design system doing this year that I can use, and having that high quality content is important. We don't really have time to do that high quality content when we're trying to trick out components. The time's not there. So that's the dream. Yeah. It's definitely a dream.
That's amazing. I love that. I like the scope of it. It's just like thinking way outside the box beyond just newsletters and things, and thinking like, how do we actually create energy and momentum around this stuff? Someone had the idea of a podcast. I loved that. Interviewing potentially, like subscribers and telling success stories, and even maybe some struggle stories and how those kind of resolved. Somebody had the idea, of course, to incorporate a design system bot to be able to take some of the load off their own Q&A stuff they're probably dealing with. There was one, this idea about a clear RACI chart, and we brought RACI up last week. So I thought I would, and there were a few folks who were kind of like, what is that? So I just grabbed a little excerpt up here if you're interested in what that is. But Molly, I know you've used this. Do you want to speak real quickly to this?
I do use it. And this is one of those corporate tools that it's like, oh, do I have to? But it's so useful just to explain how a team works, because oftentimes we're reporting directly to product leadership, and a design team is structured just a little bit different in my experience. So just setting really clear expectations around who everybody is on the team and what we do. In addition to how we communicate, I also find this is really helpful for our team members so that they're very clear on what the expectations around their role is. On a design system team, we're typically a bit smaller. Everyone's wearing many hats. They're usually doing some degree of communication. And hello, my cat would like to join. the conversation. She has lots of thoughts on design systems.
Mhm.
But I found the RACI chart to be the most useful for, again, that executive leadership team that doesn't have a lot of time. They just need that really clear vision. It's all communicated in our executive summary. It's their one-stop shop to see everything. But this just keeps everything as clear and concise as possible for the greater good.
Yeah, love that. Amy?
One of the great things about the RACI chart is people know how much you're going to bug them, because if they're sort of like accountable, they might pay attention a little bit more. If they're consulted, they might expect a little less communication from you.
Yeah.
But also, you're fighting sort of like the FOMO, right? Because you might invite only like a small handful of people because you need their strong opinions. And somebody's like, why didn't you invite me? It's like, well, I'm just speaking to one small section. I didn't mean to leave you out. If you want to upgrade your role, we can talk about that.
Yeah, I love
How
that.
nice to get people to opt into more.
Yeah, it's the business casual. It's none of your business.
There are some, I feel like RACI charts are great, but I also think there's some challenges with them, which is just, in my experience at least, maintaining them. Right, because things are changing a lot on the system. The landscape of tasks that you have before you are changing a lot. So that when things shift like that, you kind of have to make sure you're going back to these and sort of reevaluating. People are coming and going from organizations, which shifts who owns and who's responsible and all of this stuff. So there is a side to it. It's incredibly valuable, but there's a side to it that does quite a bit of work too. And I think about it as, I tried to sketch out sort of how we've worked in the past with a couple of organizations to help them structure a communication strategy, thinking about a start with like a desired outcome, like what is it we're hoping to accomplish? What is it we need to communicate? Who does it need to go to? What form does it need to take? And then what's the frequency of that? And the end result of this is a nice little, it's essentially like a sentence that's sort of like, hey, we want to make sure adoption remains healthy as new versions of the system are released. And we know that needs to go to these specific people at these specific times, so and so and so forth. But the end result of that can be like, who's responsible for that specific communication, right? And who's accountable that goes out, and who's informed, and all of those things. So it is a nice tie-in to sort of like create some actual accountability around the execution of your strategy, which I think is helpful. Other cool ideas folks had. We actually kind of hinted at this a little bit earlier, but beautifully animated and funny, clever videos. There was another one somewhere in here about video. A couple folks saying that, bite-sized animated content on hints and tips. That actually got me thinking about, I know we joked about TikTok earlier, but like there is something about the scroll, like of just like constantly unique and interesting material that's relevant or targeted at me in some capacity that I wonder if we could latch onto in our communications, right? Of like, and that made me think about this with the bite size, sort of like more engaging types of content. So how do we take these larger messages that we have and boil them down to like their essence and kind of put them up for people to grab onto? And then if they're really interested, dive in, give them some say in what's being communicated. Does that make sense to folks? Is anybody trying that?
We had this idea for our system to also serve as like little mini tutorials. Like, what can we do a video on in less than 3 minutes if we're teaching everybody about web components, for example, or using web components of React, and give it a chance to like show a little bit of personality. There's some functionality. It's a little bit of hype, but it also is something useful that'll help them do their jobs better, or, enable them in some way. I think that's, super valuable idea that you could sell leadership on the time to invest if it's providing that educational aspect.
I think for designers that especially, but also anyone else to get them interested in this stuff, you only need enough stuff that's interesting to get them to then go find the detail about how to do it. But particularly if it's something new or complex, you've just got to show them something quick enough that's interesting enough for them to want to make the time to go and find out more about how to do that particular neat trick you've just showed. And the goal is to kind of really get them to be able to, scroll on this thing when they're on a loo break or something. So if I can get into the toilet, that's where I'm trying to get.
Oh, I'm adding that to the board for sure. I love it. The last one I wanted to call out was this statement: listen less to executives and more to the product teams using the system. I thought that was interesting. And again, Molly, this comes back to that statement you had at the beginning about the culture of your leaders. Are they more proactive or more reactive? That kind of thing. So I didn't know if others had thoughts on this, like or if this was you and you added this. Tell us what's going on.
If that person's not here, my point of view is that your executive should be your partner and accountable to helping you set the agenda and hold product teams accountable to using your system. I would consider, like, if I'm having an advisory council meeting or an MPR, I don't know that I'm going there listening for directive. I'm proposing what I think should happen based on my expertise and what I'm seeing, and then I'm looking for them to partner with me on the strategy on that. I think if executives aren't doing that, then there is a fundamental cultural shift that is going to be to the detriment of the system.
Well, we are reaching the end of our time, and this has been phenomenal. Thank you all so much for jumping in. I can tell folks are starting to get to know each other a little bit, which is really exciting for me to sort of see you all become a little bit more comfortable. And Molly, so fun to have you. We'll definitely have you back. Thank you so much for being willing. A round of applause for Molly. That's it for this episode. Thanks again to our sponsors, zeroheight and Sparkbox, for making this episode possible. And thank you so much for joining us. If you'd like to participate live in future episodes of The Question, visit bencallahan.com/thequestion. And as always, stay in learning mode.